welcome everyone. My name is Earl Schaefer. I am one of the deputy directors of Open Austria, and I welcome you on behalf of the whole team to our 5th edition of the Open Salon and our winter edition of this Open Salon. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, things this year are, well, they're different, right? And by now, meeting by Zoom has become second nature, pretty much. So thank you for turning into our panel discussion titled, Does Silicon Valley Have a Future? But before we start the panel, I would like to welcome our newest colleague to the team, Kylie Meebust.
Hi everyone, nice to meet you.
This is Kylie. Kylie is a recent Berkeley grad who joined us in September, and she's our communications and event manager. So if we had a real event now, you'd get a big round of applause. Unfortunately, we can't have that. So on behalf of the whole Open Austria community, welcome Kylie.
Thank you so much, Earl.
In the past, we've hosted our Christmas networking in person, like I just said, but it's 2020, so this year we decided to go digital. So what can you expect from this panel? Over the last decades, continuous technological innovation has propelled Silicon Valley to the center of the global innovation economy. But despite, or perhaps because of this success, Silicon Valley has come under attack from many angles. The methods of technologies that have fueled its rapid growth are now increasingly under scrutiny. Furthermore, some startups and corporations are rethinking their footprint in the Bay Area due to the shift to a generally more remote workforce. So what does that mean for us, and what does that mean for the future of Silicon Valley? Will this year's challenges alter its course in the long run, or will it bounce back to become the dynamic region that it once was, and might even emerge even stronger? So my colleagues, Martin, Georg, Clara, and Mariana all have exciting guests to talk about the future of Silicon Valley. So I don't want to waste any more time and get started with Martin, who's been with Open Austria from the very beginning in 2016. He's the co-director of Open Austria and was recently appointed Austria's first tech ambassador. His guest, Lisa, he will introduce to you himself.
Thank you so much, Earl, and warm welcome also on my behalf to all of you who made it into our holiday Open Salon. We really have exciting guests, and one of them is right now next to me, Lisa Dyer. Welcome to you as well. You are a dear friend and former policy director of Partnership on AI, Partnership on Artificial Intelligence. And you also look back at a long career at the US State Department in various capacities, dealing with policy, technology, intellectual property, and so on. So a really very interesting background. And we want to start with this role of government when we discuss the future of Silicon Valley, because we kind of have a sense it's become more important being government ourselves. So my first question really relates to your previous experience at the Partnership on AI, where you were kind of in this really interesting platforms that assembled the private sector, but also civil society, not government. And you looked at kind of how to regulate artificial intelligence in order to get the benefits, but also looked at the downsides of it, if I represent that correctly. So from your experience, and you can now maybe even speak more freely, what is the future of that particular technology that so many people, countries, companies have put a lot of hopes into, but then there's also anxieties and worries. And I want to maybe make this very concrete. Policy is always very abstract. Is there like a concrete application that you imagine in the future upcoming where you think this is very exciting or very worrying and you would like to regulate it or should not regulate at all? And I would like to start with that, a concrete application of the future.
Sure, thank you. And thank you, Martin, for this invitation, and happy holidays, everybody. Thank you for joining. One of the, speaking of COVID, one of the areas that I think there's so much potential and there's so much potential for concern is healthcare. How can artificial intelligence be applied in the healthcare space in a safe and responsible way, and one that preserves the privacy of the actual the patients, the people who are being subject to healthcare, whether it's at the urgency of their at the urgent urges of their governments through vaccinations, or it is in screening cancer patients, screen people for cancer in those areas. There are so many opportunities for these technologies to detect patterns and look for opportunities for new drugs that many people have talked about. But I think talking about the potential downsides and where Silicon Valley and other companies engaged in this area can really be careful about. One of those is a lack of trust in the use of vaccinations and healthcare, especially among the Black community in the United States. There were some horrible experiments done for 40 years on Black men around vaccinations. And that is certainly impacting the idea of whether taking a vaccination for COVID-19 is a good thing for that community. The trust just isn't there. Another area is in skin cancer detection. Many of the ways that technology has been used to look at skin cancer didn't account for looking at skin of various shades, not just a white person's skin, but all shades of color. And therefore, those technologies have not been as robust and as accurate as it could be hoped. So there's a lot to learn from what has been done in the past in the healthcare industry, both before technology that we're talking about today, but also with today's technology.
So healthcare is a very obvious and very good example because it clearly shows the benefits that technologies, new frontier technologies can bring to humanity by erasing illnesses, tackle illnesses in a much better, more efficient ways. And at the same time, we all realize that health is also very sensitive in terms of your data and what is at stake, so it needs to be regulated. Is there one concrete example where you think regulation is actually not good at all, and government need to be very careful to over-regulate because it can hinder or stem innovation?
Well, actually, I actually am not a huge fan of regulating technology, and let me start off with that, and let me just give you my personal bias to start with as I answer this question. And that's based on 10 years experience of the Department of State involved in a regulatory process. And let me give you a little explanation of why I think regulation must be done carefully and it has to be done right. And what does it mean to be done right? I think there are actually 4 areas where regulation done right has to cover. First of all, the law has to be precise and clear, and the scope of that law, of the regulatory process, needs to be outlined. It has to be implementable. Do people have the right funding, the right people, the expertise to be able to implement the regulatory process? It has to be enforceable. Do they have the funding to then take the next step after it's been implemented to continue to monitor what's been done, what changes have been made, have they been made according to the regulations? And then I absolutely think public outreach and education is going to be essential to regulating any sort of technology, because for the most part, except in certain areas, certain narrow areas, technology has been out there. It's just something that we're used to having. And if people are going to start if governments are going to start regulating it, explaining exactly why and why the elements of the technology need to be regulated to prevent harm is going to be absolutely essential.
So I want to lead that question into kind of the question of our open salon. Does Silicon Valley have a future? And if you just pick up any kind of newspaper, or if you look into any kind of news source, you kind of encounter numerous upcoming pending legislative, regulatory attempts by the US government. The FTC just launched an investigation against Facebook. Recently, the Department of Justice, an antitrust investigation against Google. You know, there's talks about modifying Section 230, which regulates content and liability. So all very, very substantial regulatory attempts if they happen. And the same is happening in the European Union, which is another major regulator. So if you look at the future of Silicon Valley, do you think that that's a good thing, or do you think it's an ambivalent thing? And how does that, and what does it mean for the future of Silicon Valley, which really started out many decades ago with this ethos of, you know, you need to try out things, you need to move fast, you need to break things, and the regulation, it was not a very popular thing until recently, to put it mildly.
Absolutely. Think differently and don't be evil. I honestly think that the European Commission has a better chance at regulating technology than the United States right now. In the near future, I think both of our governments are going to be very focused on dealing with the pandemic and the economic and social effects that the pandemic has wrought on so many parts of our population and our economies, especially. But I do think that there is a momentum that wasn't there before. I'm no expert in antitrust law, but I know enough to know that these types of cases take years. And if you look at the Microsoft example, you see that it took a little while for that case to be resolved. In other areas, though, I think there are movements. The white paper on AI that the Commission put out outlined some areas where they thought there were some clear opportunities. GDPR has already proven to the world that it can have an impact on privacy, and in ways that I think it has had just tremendous influence on the way that people around the world think about privacy. Countries around the world are practically copying the text and passing those into law. What I wish that the governments in the United States would regulate is actually the uses of data sets that are used to train models. Because what we're finding is that the data in the data sets are not representative of society, or that if it's a language model, what's coming out in those data sets is derogatory, disgusting, cruel, awful language that has been used to train language models. And that is then showing up in the technologies that we're using today. There are some great pieces of research being done by a number of brilliant AI researchers that have talked about this. And I'd like to point to Deb Raji's article this morning in MIT's Tech Review that really talked about how the impacts of data sets and models are impacting the Black community. That's a great example of a place that I think absolutely there should be some attention in looking at, that we're doing this in a way that doesn't impact society in the way that it has been impacting society.
So that's certainly something that we all hope will happen, because it seems a very sensible approach and doable as well. Lisa, Dyer, thank you so much. We'll leave it at that. It's been really great talking to you, policy experts, and often collaborating with us in the past. Thank you very much. And I pass on to Earl.
Thank you, Martin.
Well, thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Martin, for this interesting session. And now, without much filling in between, I will hand it over to my colleague, George. George is one of the co-founders of Open Austria and also now the co-director of Open Austria. Additionally, he's also the head of the San Francisco office of Advantage Austria, which is the Austrian Internationalization and Innovation Agency. George is going to talk to Sandeep, who he will introduce right now. George.
Thank you very much, Earl, for this introduction. Welcome, everyone. It's a pleasure to introduce Sandeep Johri to the audience here. He's the CEO of Tricentis, a global leader in automated testing to accelerate delivery and digital transformation. There's also a connection to Austria, which we're gonna talk about in a minute. Sandeep brings over 25 years of enterprise software experience in different positions, and he's also actively involved as an advisor and investor in various startups in Silicon Valley and in India. He has graduated with an MBA from Stanford University, has a master's degree in industrial engineering from Wayne State University in Detroit, and a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from Pune University in India. Hello, Sandeep. Thanks for being with us today. It's great to see you here. I already provided a short introduction. So you have been in different roles, in numerous roles in the tech industry, very experienced here in Silicon Valley. But first question, or the first notion I want to throw out there is that the COVID pandemic obviously has changed the way we live and work. So we're doing this holiday event online. It's not possible to drink Austrian punch together in person like we did the last years. And obviously there's also some impact on the housing market in Silicon Valley and San Francisco, for example. I see a lot of moving trucks for rent signs here in the city. And different companies react differently to these challenges, right? Twitter said, we're going to work from home endlessly as long as the employees want. Netflix CEO, for example, said, as soon as there is a COVID-19 vaccine out there on the market, and we're going to go back to the office because it's so important to have people work close together in close physical proximity. How did COVID change the way you work at Tricentis? Has something changed at all? And yeah, how do you experience that as the CEO?
Okay, so thank you, George, and thank you, Open Austria, for inviting me. You'll be wondering why you asked about the change of COVID. And first of all, let me tell you what I'm missing this Christmas is the Christmas markets in Vienna. And I'm missing the punch, which is why I'm pretending that I am there, because this is what I would wear when I would go hang out. So let me take that off and come back to California. But to answer your question, you know, for the last 7 years, I've been with Tricentis for 7 years. As you know, Tricentis was started by 2 Austrians in Vienna. And over the years, we have now become the market leader globally in our category in the testing space. And it is something that both I, but more importantly, all our Austrian employees feel very proud about, because it is a global leader a software global leader that came out of Austria. And we continue to have our largest office in Austria. To your question about COVID, well, we were always a highly distributed company. When we started, we were primarily based in Austria, but we had business in the DACH region. So we sold into Austria, Switzerland, Germany. But since then, we have become a global company. So I have been based in Silicon Valley. We have offices all around the world. We sent one Austrian to Australia to open an office there. So we have a very strong presence in Sydney and Melbourne, run by an Austrian and a Swiss person from Europe. We have had many Austrians come to the US to help with our customers, and some of them are still here, who have lived here for many years now. But we are a global company, so we were already very, very distributed. With COVID, everyone's working from home. But we have offices in the US in multiple locations. We have offices in India, Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, London, Frankfurt, Zurich, and Vienna. So, and Poland as well. So we've always been distributed. COVID did not impact us much in the sense that our day-to-day work did change. We didn't have the opportunity to go into the offices, but the work continued. We were able to jump into, we continued work without missing a beat, even though people were working from home. So.
Right, so you're already a global company. It didn't change too much. You used to have phone calls all around the world at different times of the day. So That's interesting to hear that it didn't change too much from the operation point. So we have already mentioned, and you have laid out that you have also one of the headquarters in Vienna, Austria. So that's where the company started, and you joined 7 years ago. So why did Tricentis choose Silicon Valley as the second global headquarters? Why not somewhere else in the US or somewhere else in the world? Why particularly Silicon Valley?
Well, so Dave, when I joined about 7 years ago, 2013, they had already created a very good presence in the local market in the DACH region. They had incredible customers, and they wanted to go global. And as they were thinking about going global, the two founders did not have as much experience taking a company global, scaling a software company. Their background was more from a services perspective. And their technical expertise, if you may, in testing. So they were looking for a CEO. They happened to find me. I was based in Silicon Valley, so they wanted a CEO based in the US and ideally based in Silicon Valley, even though it is so far away from Vienna. They happened to find me, and I was based here, and that was one of the main reasons. But I think for a European company that wants to become a global company, and especially with the US, especially in the enterprise space, the US is too important a market. So you have to create a presence in the market. And I think Silicon Valley is a great place to be because you get plugged in right away. I happen to be here, but even if they hadn't found somebody here, I think having a presence in Silicon Valley really is valuable. There's a network that you are aware of, not just of people of all skills, everything that it takes to build a company. The richness of the network in Silicon Valley is unique, which is why I've lived here for 33 years now, 35 years. And that was the reason. It was partly circumstantial because I was here, but it also made sense.
Right. No, I agree. Like the special network and the interdisciplinary cross-sectoral networks here are amazing, and especially the openness of the people and the ease of getting in touch. I just sent you a LinkedIn message and asked you, Sandeep, are you able to join us here for this webinar? You said yes instantly. So it's a very quick communication that also facilitates those interactions across those different boundaries. Now, coming back to the first notion, you know, COVID, but also my colleague Martin talked about regulation issues, all these trends and kind of like pressures coming in from different sides, some company moving away, some talent is moving away. Do you think, and you mentioned that in for the citation for this webinar, that Silicon Valley will continue to be the mecca of technology innovation? So do you see that changing, Silicon Valley being the hotspot for global technology innovation due to this challenges, or will it remain its spot in the global ecosystem?
So I believe that Silicon Valley will continue to remain the center of the universe as far as technology and innovation is concerned. Having said that, I've been here for 35 years. I've heard the same things and the same complaints for a very long time. Okay, that Silicon Valley is too expensive, which is true. Silicon Valley, it's difficult to get a good house, difficult to afford your family, blah, 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 blah. And that has been true for 35 years. And the parallel I would draw is you hear the same things about New York City. New York City, every so often, you hear New York City is too expensive, too much crime, too much this, too much that. And you hear about one bank moving out or one headquarter of some company moving out. And that happens. And I don't want to deny that. There are many companies that have said that were based here that are saying, oh my God, we cannot afford to scale here. It might be better to scale. So that movement of companies coming and companies going is a constant process. It's not anything new. COVID, and that has happened in the past, and it will continue to happen. But you'd also have to think about different stages of a company. When a company is 5,000 people and is looking to add 5,000 more people in the next 5 years, I think there is a lot of other places that you should be going to. People have gone offshore. People have gone to other locations within the US. But when you're a small company and you're looking for a few core people, high skilled, high experience, Silicon Valley still has that critical mass, which will not change. Now, what COVID has done is, when I came to Silicon Valley 35 years ago, I came from the auto industry where, forget distributed work environments, you had to wear a tie every day to work. If you didn't wear a tie, you would have to leave and go, if you forgot your tie, you have to go back and bring your tie. And I found it amazing that you could come to Silicon Valley and you didn't have to wear a tie. And then I found it even more amazing that you could wear anything, any clothes. You could even wear your jeans and come to work. And then, I noticed people wearing flip-flops and shorts and coming to work, and people being flexible about work hours. When I joined at Tricentis, we had fixed work hours. Silicon Valley dropped that behavior 25 years ago, so we implemented that at Tricentis. What I'm saying is that there are a lot of things that happen in Silicon Valley, and in the same way, distributed work and flexible work hours is not new to Silicon Valley. It's new to many other companies. So COVID has taught other companies, so many other companies like banks and manufacturing companies and others would always say that, well, technology companies can do distributed work, we cannot. COVID has convinced them that they can do more. And even for technology companies, I think COVID has forced people to work even more distributed, to the point where they're saying, do we even need to be in a central? Do we even need to have an office? So I think that creativity of work environments with the help of online tools and easy access. Think about this. We have about 100 people in India, Tricentis does. Mm-hmm. 5 years ago, 7 years ago, if I wanted to do a distributed work environment in India, it would not be possible. Why? Because everyone did not have access to cheap broadband internet access. So you had to come into the office. Today, in India, in Pune, where we are based, everybody has better bandwidth than we have in the US, cheaper bandwidth than we have in the US. So with COVID, all 80 employees of ours have actually gone back to smaller cities that they come from and are working from there. So technology, tools, and they are on Slack, they are on email, all that allows you to do it. So yeah. And that happens. So COVID has had a huge impact, but it won't kill Silicon Valley.
Great. I just want to underline the notion, which I found very interesting, that yes, you come here for the talent, perhaps for the venture capital to scale, but it's also to adopt the cultural values and the special values that Silicon Valley has, and adopt that for the company to flatten the hierarchies, to have an informal communication style, and all that fosters creativity and innovation. That's one of the main side effects. For some, might be the main effect for moving operations to Silicon Valley. We have about 2 minutes left before I hand over again to my colleague Earl. Maybe just your quick thoughts on, so we talked about what, for example, European companies can learn from Silicon Valley. So you're head of a company that operates also has a strong presence in Europe. What can Silicon Valley learn from Europe or from Austria? What do you think works the other way?
The European companies build great technology, and don't overhype their products. They focus on customers. They focus on solving really difficult problems. And that is sometimes Silicon Valley companies tend to build a new product. It's very simplistic, and they focus on other smaller companies, and they think they're going to become $1 billion company. I think what I learned at Tricentis, when I was shocked at how many customers they had and how mature their product was. So there is a lot of learning to be done. I mean, European companies initially build things a little slower, but they build very real things. They are very engineering thorough, if you may. So there is a lot of benefit to the cross-border. There's a lot of learnings to be had. There is innovation happening everywhere. When I told people I'm joining Tricentis and I told them they're based in Vienna, they're like, oh, really? are there technology companies in Vienna? And I said, yes, there are some incredible technology companies in Vienna.
Right.
The other thing you can learn is that in places like Vienna, getting access to talent is a whole lot easier than Silicon Valley. We would hire people from the University of Vienna, the Technical University of Vienna, incredible talent. We could pull people from all of Europe into Vienna. So there's a lot of benefits you can get from having a cross-border presence. So.
Thank you so much, Sandeep. That was very interesting insights also to see it from your perspective, how you perceive Austria and the value of, for example, talent and technology in Austria and Vienna. So thank you so much again, Sandeep, for sharing this. Perhaps you have time to join us for the networking, and I hope we meet in person soon. I hand over to my colleague Earl now. Thank you again.
All right, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, George. Thank you, Sandeep. And without any breaks in between, I'm going to hand off the microphone, so to say, to my colleague Mariana Bonnecki, who's the managing partner of Avi Ventures, a Silicon Valley strategy and business consulting company. She's a senior advisor to the Austrian Business Agency and also to Open Austria. Here with Mariana today is Amit, who she will introduce.
Thank you, Earl. Hi, and welcome to the Future of Silicon Valley VC Talk. Today, we will be discussing the recent changes in the VC landscape, the impact of COVID, and the recent expansion of venture capital funds from Silicon Valley to Europe. Our guest today is Amit Garg. He is co-founder and managing partner of Tau Ventures, a Palo Alto seed fund with a focus on applied AI in digital health, enterprise, and automation. Amit has been living in Silicon Valley for over 20 years. He brings a vast experience from Samsung corporate venture arms, Samsung Next Ventures, Northwest Ventures, as well as Google. He has backed exceptional companies and actually co-founded Health IQ, a $450 million company. He is a graduate from Stanford and Harvard. Welcome, Amit. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. You guys are so organized. It's incredible. I've been on so many Zoom panels and it's like boom, 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 one after the other. And hats off to you, Mariana, and the team.
Thank you. I was just like thinking the last time I've seen you, it was one of the conferences you were giving public talk on Sand Hill Road. And I was just, oh my goodness, it's like a year has passed since then. And like so many things changed, all our routines. But on the other hand, here we are, new opportunities emerged. We would like to hear more about your background and your experience. And what do you think, what impact did COVID have on VC industry here in Silicon Valley?
Sure. No, thank you for those kind words, Mariana. I remember fondly those days where we could meet in person also. But I think of our industry overall is well set up to adapt to the situation we're in. For me, at least, since you're asking how the VC industry has changed, I've become more efficient. I don't have to drive to meetings, and I've been saving money on coffees. So I do call after call after call after call. And yes, it does get a little bit tiring, but it has become more efficient for me. I think overall VCs have had resistance in investing without having met a startup in person. That resistance has lowered significantly because of COVID. I am probably on the furthest edge here of not feeling that that's a challenge. 5 years ago, I invested in Autonomy, a self-driving car company, and got sold for $450 million in 2 years. It was a great investment. And I invested in that team without having met them in person. I did do my diligence. I did a lot of homework. I did speak to them fairly regularly and often, but meeting them in person was not a requirement for me. So when COVID hit, the way we adapted Tau Ventures, my fund, we have done this year 8 investments, of which 5 we had never met the founders before. So we are comfortable operating in this new environment. And I've noticed that more VCs have become more comfortable. I don't know if as comfortable as us, but quite a few have told us that yes, they are they're making investments without having met somebody in person. I think the more interesting challenge is, what does the pandemic cause in terms of valuations and in terms of the ability to close a round? So we invest in seed, and we have noticed that valuations have suffered a correction, at least in Silicon Valley. And I don't think that this is a bad thing, to be honest. Obviously, I'm speaking as an investor. It's better for me for valuations to be lower, but I actually think that's good for everyone, because the valuations were too high until pre-COVID, and it sets up the expectations and sets up the bar too high. If you are two people in a garage raising 5 million at a 20 million post, the expectations is that you will perform so well that you can raise the next round at 40 or 50, and then you can raise the next at 100, and it creates a almost like a competition, a game that is just not winnable. For very few companies have trajectories like that, and it's kind of what Sandeep was saying before me. It creates a hype cycle. So I think being more sober allows companies to create more sustainable business models and to focus on what really matters. So we have noticed that the correction is about 25% in terms of valuations. And this has been reported by many others. There's reports written about this. I'm speaking from our own data set. The second thing we have noticed is that the amount of time to do a deal has increased a little bit. Yes, it has become more efficient, but it does mean, at least in the beginning of the year, that fewer VCs were as active, because VCs that are well established, they have portfolios that they have to maintain, and they were keeping more in reserve to make sure that those companies would be doing well. It's actually not us, because we are a newer fund, but more established funds, bigger funds, they kept a little bit more in reserve, and it meant that the velocity at which deals are done slowed down a little bit. I think that is temporary. I think that will come back up. It is already starting to come back up.
It's so good you mentioned that, because pre-COVID valuation, we all know story about SoftBank and WeWork and extraordinary valuation that were hyped up here in Silicon Valley. So the correction was probably like underway already. So it's great to hear like that the founders actually have this access to you guys, like, because we are all Zooming and there is financing to be, you know, available on a Zoom. So I was just reading NFX was publishing the etiquette rules, how to actually fundraise on a Zoom. You know, for me, it's like all unprecedented. I'm a former investment banker from Wall Street. Like no one was giving money like that. So for me, it's amazing things that happening right now. So my question to you, like, if that's probably very much true for the founders that are already, you know, in this Silicon Valley ecosystem, what about international founders? Do they have such an easy time to access these?
Yeah, and I do want to go back to one comment you just made. Silicon Valley is certainly guilty of the hype machine and of having inflated valuations and expectations, but SoftBank is not a Silicon Valley institution, neither was WeWork. So, you know, we can't take all the blame or all the credit. But going here to your question, so international founders, I'm also an immigrant to Silicon Valley, like many others. I think Silicon Valley, almost half of the companies have an immigrant as a founder. I think that's the statistic. So I grew up in Brazil. It's not obvious, and my family comes from India. And I have worked with Austrian founders and with European founders and with people from all over the world, really. So I'm particularly sensitive to the fact that as an immigrant or being based outside of very mature ecosystems, it is more difficult for you to get access to capital. But I do believe that the world has flattened a bit. It is not flat, but it has flattened a bit. If you are in a geography that has historically had less startups, less access to capital, you can now access another geography that's richer in those metrics much more easily than before. If I were sitting in the place I grew up in Brazil, which is a small place, it's a small city, I would have now much easier access to the centers of capital in Brazil and even to the centers of capital here in the US. I know who those people are. I read about them. I can send them an email. I get connected. I read about what they're writing and thinking and doing, right? Like that is thanks to the magic of the internet. And I am noticing more and more investors being open to teams that are distributed globally. So we actually are very friendly towards teams that are distributed globally. I have investments in our portfolio today where the majority of team is in Mexico, where part of the team is in India, actually majority of the team is in India, where part of the team is in Singapore, part of the team is in Brazil, part of the team is in Europe. Or the go-to-market is in Thailand or in Taiwan. Those are all real examples from our portfolio. We do require, as a fund, that the CEO be based in the US or Canada. And that is a specific requirement to us because we want to minimize geopolitical risk. We want to minimize the fact that the CEO may not be able to come back and forth to the US and do business in the US. But we're perfectly happy if other people in the team are located outside. I know other VC funds that have different lenses to this. There's a fund that we've collaborated occasionally called Unshackled Ventures. They will sponsor your visa. Their specific criteria is we invest in immigrants. And so, yes, as an international, it is sometimes harder, but there are also more and more opportunities for you to get funded.
That is so amazing. Like this whole geographical arbitrage, distributed work, it creates really many new opportunities that founders perhaps didn't have like 10 years ago, or even 5 years ago. What I would like also to hear your thoughts on the expansion of Silicon Valley funds towards Europe. Like recently Sequoia set up a London office. If there is like such a hard competition for early stage deals, do they actually want to tap in earlier? Is this going to be a trend for other funds to follow, or you think it's just one-off?
So seed is, or early stage in general, is a lot more about collaboration, and late stage growth becomes a lot more about competition. If you think about early stage, it is high amounts of risk, and investors are trying to work with each other and work with the company to minimize that risk. So I think that larger funds wanting to have a leg, early leg into early stage makes a lot of sense. That is a secular trend. It is not something that is just happening now. It has been going on for a long time. So I do expect that trend to continue. I think the more is merrier, actually, at the early stage. That's my philosophy. I think your question is specifically for Europe. I don't focus on Europe because I'm focused on US and Canada, but my sense is that the European ecosystem is burgeoning. There's somebody will at some point talk about Brexit. I think Brexit does create more opportunities for the continental Europe because a lot of companies will actually move towards continental Europe. Berlin, for better or for worse, is sort of becoming one of the major hubs, as is Paris, but I do see Vienna also coming up. There's some fantastic talent out of Vienna. So I think that it's not that Silicon Valley is losing its place in the world. I think it's that the other ecosystems are developing more and more, and VCs recognize that and are willing to also look into those ecosystems. It's similar to what happened in Canada. Canada used to be a satellite when it came to VC investments, and now a lot of VC funds from the US have created a presence in Toronto, typically in Toronto. So I see the same thing happening in Europe also.
Excellent. That's a very good trend for us. So, Amit, we're going to be running out of time in a minute. Just finally, I would like to hear your thoughts a little bit about vulnerability that founders have. We're still in a culture of fear of failure, a fear of like feeling alone on this not an easy, company building journey. You as a co-founder of HealthIQ, you as investor, what advice would you give to our founders?
Oh boy, easier said than done, right? But I think the key thing is to surround yourself with good people. We invest ultimately in a team. A team with a good idea, a great team with a good idea is preferable to us than a good team with a great idea, because the great team will figure out better and better ideas and will over execute. So as a founder, it's really scary to take the leap of faith by yourself. We always encourage founders to have a co-founder and to build a really strong early team. It's a small group of people that really makes a difference in the world, right? That's the only thing that really makes a difference in the world.
Thank you so much, Amit. And for you guys, follow Amit on social media at AMGARG and tune in to our next event.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Mariana. Thank you, Amit, for those really interesting insights about the global investor landscape. Now I'm going to hand it off to my colleague, Clara. Clara Blume is the Deputy Director of Open Austria and recently appointed head of the Open Austria Art and Tech Lab. As the president of Oinik Silicon Valley and founder of the Art and Tech Policy Network, The Grid, she launched Exposure, which is a new festival format in San Francisco, launched together with her EU colleagues and many local art organizations in San Francisco in September of 2020. Clara is going to talk to Jonathon, who she will introduce herself. Clara, take it away.
Thank you so much, Earl. Yes, here we are for our final spotlight in this open salon on the possible futures of Silicon Valley. My guest today, I couldn't be more excited. He was called a multimedia philosopher prophet by The Atlantic. He's an artist, writer, and experimental philosopher based in San Francisco. He exhibited and lectured in numerous institutions worldwide, ranging from Stanford to CERN to the UNESCO, you name it. He's also author of a weekly art and design column at Forbes. He has written for Wired, so he is basically a legend. So with that, I'd like to introduce Jonathon Keats.
Hello, thank you.
Jonathon, it's a pleasure to have you.
I'm delighted to be here and really grateful for the opportunity to speak with you and with the people who are watching the salon.
I love your outfit. As I already pointed out, no one is as classy as you. I tried to put myself into Christmas mode, but let's dive right into it. We have 15 minutes and we have lots of ground to cover. So the topic of this open salon seems to be on the cyclical renewal of Silicon Valley. So the metaphor that I'd like to use here is Silicon Valley seems to be like a skin that's periodically sheds its skin to show yet another version of itself. And so we could call this, to drive it back to the art and technology sphere, almost a creative or perhaps even a Darwinian destruction. And that, interestingly, has been named several times as one of the leading success factors of Silicon Valley, something that is very hard to replicate, this emerging of new startups and the rapid decline as well, which always gives space and place for new ideas to emerge and foster. So in your opinion, since you've written about this extensively and you have this capacity as a philosopher to take a bird's view on these things, I'd like to talk to you about what you think, in your opinion, are the contributing factors for this cyclical renewal.
Well, Silicon Valley is a place that really only came into being as a result of the technology companies that entered into it, largely because it was nowhere in a sense. I mean, this was apple orchards. This was a place where anything was possible because it was not exactly a blank slate. I think that would be unfair to the agriculture that was taking place there. And agriculture is every bit as important as social media, more so, I would argue. But nevertheless, there was a way in which it really didn't have a history. And when you don't have a history, you can make up who and what you are. I mean, that's what I do every day of the week. I don't really have any qualifications or experience in anything, so therefore I can make up what I am. And I think that that is really
hot take, my friend, with your credentials, but okay.
So I think that's equivalent in terms of Silicon Valley as a place. It's a place without portfolio. And I think that what has happened over the decades is that it has come to have the burden of history that is both beneficial from the standpoint of being able to attract talent, able to attract money, able to attract attention, and therefore able to do things in the world, but that also leads to certain assumptions, certain ways of working. There is inevitably what in computer science, what we call legacy systems. So the legacy system in the case of a computer often goes back to the mainframe or goes back to the even to the mechanical devices or the devices using vacuum tubes that predated the microchip. And I think that there's an equivalent way in which these legacy systems accrue. And this is true also for individuals, for people. So in the same way that I like to think of myself as operating without portfolio and being essentially that blank slate that I imagined myself to be as a child, or that at least John Locke claimed that I was, I don't think that that really is so much the case, but I think it's very difficult for me to see for myself where those legacy systems are and how they work. And I think that it's similar in Silicon Valley, that there's a lot now of that burden and that it is not necessarily visible, nor does Silicon Valley necessarily want to or have the capacity to or have the interest in examining that.
Okay, well, that's a very provocative take. I'd love to dive into this. You were talking about the burden of history, especially now since I made a comparison to Europe. That's a very interesting point of view. So if history is a baggage, but also something that propels, is something that you can draw on, and this is basically from a European standpoint, one of the major arguments to draw from history, to learn from history, to not repeat mistakes. That's one of our major mantras, clearly. So if you come to a space in an imaginarium like Silicon Valley, where you can become or be anything you like, that is clearly a magnet for creative minds, right? And people, I want to say, from all fields of life, from all walks of life. So let's talk about the history of Silicon Valley just for a second to understand the question that we posed in this open salon, and this is where I want to create an arc to all the previous speakers. So does Silicon Valley have a future? I want you to give us a hot take, also looking back with one eye on the past and one eye on the future. As I always like to say, our artists, those are the real futurists here. So give us your take in the historic context of how Silicon Valley was created and where it is bound to head right now.
Well, I think that that is an impossible question to answer, and therefore is a great question. It's a sort of question that I like to ask. But since you're asking me, I'm just going to do my best to make up some sort of a response and see where it takes us. So I think I think that Silicon Valley, in terms of its history, really has been, as I said earlier, a space where anything could happen because there was nothing to stop one or another possibility from developing into actuality. And the result of that was that a lot of people who were entrepreneurial entered into that space, and a lot of those people entered into a space that was also occupied by people who were fundamentally altruistic in terms of seeing this in a sense as an extension of Stanford University, of UC Berkeley, of a university sort of sensibility. And these people coming together, perhaps that is one of the many reasons why Silicon Valley managed to accomplish as much as it has achieved, is the fact that there was a mixture that was a mixture of incompatible forces. And in their incompatibility, that tension perhaps led to a new way in which technology could work, a new way in which industry could operate. And thinking of Silicon Valley as being the center of technology, I think, is really a falsehood, because I think that everything that we do as humans really can be defined as technology. And so it's important to step back and to say, as I did a moment ago about agriculture, it's important to step back and to say that Silicon Valley is not doing something that is different in kind, but rather that in terms of the technologies that Silicon Valley works on and works toward, they tend to be more within the realm of the unknown, or really more within the realm of the futuristic, because they are based on systems and operations that are not yet developed, that don't yet have history in their own right. So what happens when you bring people together in this way, I think, is that there is an incredible opportunity for creative engagement through what we might think is not a positive attribute, but what can be, which is misunderstanding. I think that a lot of the misunderstandings that happened early on and that still happen to some extent led to a recognition of opportunity, of possibilities that could come into the world and could do a lot of good and could also do a lot of harm. Meaning, when you have misunderstanding, it means that you end up with something that never happened before, because every misunderstanding is misunderstood in its own way. But you also have a possibility, a real possibility, that that misunderstanding leads to the construction of something that nobody wants, or at least that some part of the group who came together might abhor. And I think that the altruistic side of that partnership is rightly, in many ways, questioning what sort of deal with the devil they made.
Okay, that's a perfect moment to segue into our final question. Let's talk about misunderstanding. So apparently we're now in this new chapter of Silicon Valley, entering a completely new version of Silicon Valley. Much more regulatory frameworks will come into place in this coming year, so that will radically change the face of Silicon Valley. And I'd also like to mention the misunderstanding of the different silos that operate in Silicon Valley. So you have policymakers that need to understand and perhaps sometimes also misunderstand the people who create technology, that you have other spheres that operate and need to regulate or shape technology together with the creators, technologists themselves. So as we like to say in our the grid network that we've created 2 years ago, our mantra is that art powers technology. So our, technology is an inherently artistic process. So I'd like to talk to you about something that is close to your heart and also close to mine, which is how can you actually try to shape technology in a positive way to perhaps create a better future for all of us, for all of mankind. It seems to be on everybody's mind. Clearly, there's a new lawsuit every day now. Today it was Facebook, tomorrow it will be Google again. So I want to talk about the capacity for being a generalist in this current crisis, and perhaps working our way against this very expertise-focused tunnel vision that Silicon Valley is perhaps also being known for, and work towards a more interdisciplinary, interconnected, also transatlantic partnership that really ensures that the shaping of technology benefits all of us. So what is your take here? What can artists contribute in this sphere?
Well, it's of course difficult to answer that question without turning this into an advertisement for myself. And
go ahead, shoot. That's exactly where I'm going with this.
So I think that there is a real advantage to being an artist or an experimental philosopher, as I call myself, because it is a job title that is truly without portfolio. Nobody is an experimental philosopher. I don't know what it means. I wake up every morning and I make it up. I think that there's a real advantage to that because of the fact that I don't necessarily need to accept any given role, any given way of doing things, any dogma. I can work with everybody equally. First of all, I'm not threatening to anyone. And I think that this is true of anyone who is an artist or anyone else who wants to be an experimental philosopher. It's a title that's open to everybody. So please.
Sure, but it's not without threat, right? I mean, clearly, artists are the major critics right now of technological tools and digital tools everywhere, right? So they can be a threat.
Well, I think that artists need to become more of a threat in terms of the degree to which artists take advantage of the fact that we can infiltrate. I hope that nobody from Silicon Valley is listening, because then we won't be able to infiltrate anymore. But when I say that artists are not threatening, I mean that I'm not the competition. Therefore, I can work with pretty much everyone and anyone. And I work regularly with academia. And not only here, I just came from a residency with the Fraunhofer Institute of Building Physics in Germany, for instance. I've worked a lot.
And you worked with
throughout.
Hyundai.
I've also worked with Hyundai, which is, so, and in the case of Hyundai, I was working with Hyundai Ventures, which is their Silicon Valley office. But there's definitely the possibility of working with a lot of different organizations. And I think that what artists can do potentially is, because a company has an internal logic and ultimately a burden, perhaps, or a duty to the bottom line, to the shareholder. There are certain limitations in terms of how that company is going to operate, and arguably from an internal perspective, how the company should operate. But to bring in somebody, to let someone who doesn't have any of those responsibilities play with the ideas or bring ideas in that don't really make any sense from the internal logic of the company, this, I think, can lead to the sort of vaunted legendary disruption that we often talk about in Silicon Valley.
That's exactly right. Perfect moment to stop. I couldn't have said it better. So artists are actually the trigger of innovation, and the future is interdisciplinary, clearly. If Silicon Valley sheds its skin yet again, it should shed it in concert with artistic practices. So with that, thank you very much, Jonathon Keats. And I'd like to hand it back over to my colleague, Earl. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Clara. Thank you, Jonathon, again, for this final panel sessions. But before you all log out, we have one more networking surprise for you. So hang around. Again, thank you for all the panelists and attendees for coming, for showing up, and for chatting with us with this, and some parts, provocative question. We're thankful to have you able to join us for the final Open Salon holiday special of the year. Now I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Kylie, who's going to tell you what this little networking surprise is and how it's going to look like.
Thank you, Earl, and thank you to all of our panelists and participants today. I hope you all enjoyed hearing from these different panelists with their very unique perspectives and backgrounds. And now we want to hear from you. So we will be transitioning over to the platform Wonder, which is a social platform for networking and connecting in small groups. You do not need to download anything. You will just follow the link, which is now in the chat, and from there you will create an avatar, which will just be your name, your photo, and allowing your video and audio permissions. From there, you'll see a little circle pop up, which is your avatar, and you'll be able to drag your circle over with your mouse to see other avatars and meet up with other people. To start talking to other participants in Wonder, you will drag your circle over to their circle, and it will create a group. So please come join us. It'll be lots of fun. And if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat here or message us on our Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. We hope to see you in Wonder, and we can't wait to hear from you and see your faces as well after you've gotten to look at our faces so much today. So thank you again for being here.